The billionaire's only son had never spoken a word in 7 years. But the morning his new maid was forced to her knees on the cold marble floor, something in the boy's eyes shifted in a way that none of the specialists, with all their degrees and all their fees, had ever once managed to produce. Sophia Bennett had been working for 4 hours, 4 hours inside the Caldwell estate. Marble floors, hushed corridors, rooms where sound seemed to have been asked to leave. She had been given a gray uniform, a schedule, and one directive from Mrs. Patton, the head housekeeper: be useful and unnoticed. Sophia had spent most of her adult life being exactly that. The spill was in the sitting room, coffee, or sauce, spread across pale marble near the window and dried overnight into a stain a mop wouldn't lift. Mrs. Patton stood at the doorway with a cloth in her extended hand. "On your knees," she said. "Get down and use the cloth." 3 other staff members went carefully still, people who had decided, by long practice, that the wisest thing was to not see this clearly. Sophia took the cloth and knelt. The marble was cold through her uniform trousers. She thought about the nursing home invoice in her bag, the number on it, the fact that this job paid $40 an hour more than the last one. Just a floor, just a stain. "Put your back into it," Mrs. Patton said. That was when she heard it. Not a sound, the opposite. The sudden collapse of every ambient noise in the room, replaced by a soft, rhythmic percussion that took Sophia 1 full second to locate and name. In the corner nearest the window, pressed between the settee and the wall, a boy had made himself as small as possible, knees at his chest, both hands clamped over his right ear, his head moving, slowly, rhythmically, striking the wainscoting behind him with the patient motion of a child who has done this so many times it has become automatic. Not a tantrum, not fear. Pain, managed in the only way he had found. He was not making a sound. A 7-year-old boy in visible, sustained agony, and the room was simply arranged around him. "Don't touch him," Mrs. Patton said, reading Sophia's body before Sophia had decided anything. "He does this. The doctors have cleared it as behavioral. Clean the stain." Sophia looked at the cloth. She looked at the boy. She looked at the 12 feet between them. She dropped the cloth and crossed the room. She knelt beside him, not grabbing, not startling, and placed both hands over his, where they pressed against his ear. Not force, just the weight of 2 more palms, a second layer between his ear and the world. He went rigid, then, by degrees, less rigid. She began to hum. The melody found its shape almost on its own, the song she had sung to her brother Danny in the dark when he was 4 and couldn't explain what hurt. Paper bird, fly away far. Low and steady, barely above a whisper, her mouth close to his ear, not singing to him so much as near him, the way you hum when you are trying to stay anchored. The boy went completely still. His head stopped its rhythmic collision with the wall. Then he turned and looked at her face, not at her eyes, at her mouth, watching it with the locked-in focus of someone decoding something that mattered more than anything else in the room, reading her lips, the way you read moving things in the dark, when seeing is the only sense you have left. His hands came away from his ear, slowly, trembling at the fingertips. 2 small fingers reached toward her face, and she held perfectly still and let them rest against her lips, feeling the vibration of the melody through her skin. She kept humming. The bracing behind his eyes gave way. Not entirely, not forever, but for that moment, The expression of a child perpetually waiting for impact became something else. He reached to the settee cushion and lifted a paper crane, folded from a grocery bag, lopsided, one wing crumpled beyond repair, and set it in her open palm with the gravity of a child placing something precious. "What do you think you're doing?" Mrs. Patton's voice split the room. "Get away from him! You were told not to touch him. He was hurting himself. That is not your concern." Loud enough that the other staff members looked up. "You are a housekeeper. You have been here 4 hours. Are you trying to kill him?" Noah looked from Mrs. Patton to Sophia, then back. He had not curled away. His eyes, still fixed on Sophia's face, held something she would spend the rest of that first week trying to name. Sophia stood slowly. She kept the paper crane. "If you touch the child again without instruction," Mrs. Patton said, low now, worse for being quiet, "you will not see a second day in this house." "Understood," Sophia said. She picked up the cloth. She finished the stain. But she carried the broken crane in her pocket for the rest of the afternoon, and she thought about her brother Danny, and she thought, that is not behavioral. That child is in pain from something specific, and nobody in this house has thought to look. Damien Caldwell signed documents in steady, joyless succession, one after the next, as if stopping meant something would catch up to him. He sat at the desk in the study adjacent to the sitting room, 2 laptops open, papers spread in a geography of thoroughness. He had built an AI company from a converted garage to a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and somewhere in that achievement had developed a conviction that thoroughness was the same thing as care. He had funded every appointment. He had hired the right people. He had done, by every measurable standard, everything a father was supposed to do. Across the open doorway, Noah sat with a picture book open on his lap. He wasn't reading it. His eyes hadn't moved across the page in 4 minutes, appearing occupied, a skill learned far too young. Damien knew his son was there. He knew through appointments, reports, and the summaries of people he paid to understand what he didn't. He signed the next invoice, $800 per session. 4th clinic, 7th specialist. He was not going to be the father who stopped trying. Sophia moved close to the walls with a dust cloth, peripheral and careful since Mrs. Patton's warning, but she was watching Noah. She had been watching him for 3 days. She watched him tilt his head rightward whenever anyone spoke, the good ear angling toward sound, compensating automatically. She watched the micro-expression around his right eye, a tightening less than a second, each time a certain frequency hit the room. She watched him press one finger to his right ear, always the same location, locating the point of pain with the accuracy of someone who has pressed that exact spot 1,000 times. She thought about Danny. 2 years of wrong diagnoses. 2 years of someone pressing a finger to the same spot. She moved to the side table near the window and lifted the small brass letter opener from the mail tray. She waited for Noah to settle, then she tapped it, once, softly, against the metal rim. Ting! Noah's entire right side contracted. Not a startle, a pain response. Shoulder rising, chin dropping, hand flying to the ear in a single motion, finger finding the exact same point. His eyes squeezed shut for 2 full seconds before he controlled it. That was not a child who could not hear. That was a child who heard with pain and had been hearing with pain for a very long time. "What are you doing?" Damien stood in the office doorway. His eyes went from the letter opener in her hand to his son. I was testing something, Sophia said. She heard how it sounded. My son has been evaluated by 4 specialists over 2 years. He has a complete treatment protocol. He has a diagnosis. I know. I'm not questioning the specialists. His response to that sound was a pain response, not a hearing, I know what my son's responses look like. Not cruel. The words of a man operating from exhaustion and certainty in equal measure. Someone who had answered this question for years and stopped believing it led anywhere. She looked at Noah, watching the 2 adults with the practiced vigilance of a child who reads rooms accurately and quickly. I'm sorry, she said. She set the letter opener back, picked up the dust cloth. Damien stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching her with the attention of a man who has been surprised and is deciding what to do about it. Then he went back to his desk. He did not close the door. Sophia moved the cloth across the bookshelf in slow strokes, and behind her eyes, she was already going over the list. Right ear only. Same location every time. Pain on specific frequencies. A response that looked like nerve compression, not structural deafness. She thought, someone missed something, or someone chose not to find it. She didn't yet know which one it was. It was an accident, the first time. Sophia had not accounted for Damien coming home early on Wednesdays. It was 3:15 when she heard the front door, which meant she and Noah had been alone in the conservatory for 40 minutes, longer than intended, and, she realized, the most comfortable she had felt in this house since her first morning. It had started simply. Noah had followed her. She had been cutting stems for the table arrangement, aware of Noah hovering near the doorway for several minutes, before she turned, looked at him directly, pulled a chair to the work table, and patted the seat. He came and sat. She gave him a stem of soft freesia and mimed cutting it at an angle. He watched her hands with full concentration, tongue pressed to the corner of his mouth, then tried it himself. They worked like that. No words, no performance. She had been learning his private vocabulary, built from necessity, not instruction. A tilt of the head that meant, I don't understand. A hand to the sternum that meant something closer to, I feel this. She had started answering in kind, meeting him in the space where he already was. When she pointed at the freesia and raised her eyebrows, what do you think? He tilted his head. She pressed the stem to her wrist and mimed smelling it with cartoonish pleasure. He laughed. A real laugh, surprised and full-bodied, and immediately covered his mouth with both hands. Then, slowly, the hands came down. He smiled, not the careful expression she had seen him aim at adults, the other kind, the kind that started in the eyes and had nowhere to hide. She smiled back. She pointed at the buckets. Pick one. He scanned them with great seriousness and chose a single stem of white chamomile, holding it in both hands with complete gravity. Don't exceed your role. Damien Caldwell stood at the threshold, still in his coat, keys in hand, the stillness of a man who had come home expecting an empty room and found his son laughing. Noah hadn't noticed yet. He was still holding the chamomile, watching the winter light move through the petals, his face at rest in a way Sophia had not seen once in a week of watching him. No tension at the jaw, no hand raised toward the ear. Damien's hand went still on his keys. He didn't look away from Noah for 3 full seconds, long enough that it became something, and he knew it. Noah looked up and saw his father. The smile pulled back, tightened into something more guarded, the adjustment of a child who has learned the safe amount of joy and stopped just short of it. He held the chamomile toward Damien. Something moved through Damien's expression in the half second before he closed it down. Not sentiment exactly, but the place where sentiment would be if he let it. He looked at his son's face, at the wariness settling back into the eyes, and his jaw tightened in a way that had nothing to do with anger. "I'll be in a meeting until 7, he said. He looked at Noah once more. Noah's eyes had gone to that familiar, held-breath vigilance, a child who has learned not to want too visibly in front of his father. Damien held his son's gaze for a moment, then looked away first. Then he walked back down the hall. Noah watched the doorway after his father was gone. Then he set the chamomile at the center of the table, very deliberately, as if it were placed there to stay. She looked at the flower and thought, he is so used to being almost seen. By the end of the second week, Sophia had a list she kept entirely in her head. Right ear only, same location, posterior upper third. Pain on high frequencies. Pain also triggered by direct light at certain angles. He touches the same spot every time, with the accuracy of someone who has been locating a specific point of pain for years. It was the light that confirmed something she had been trying not to confirm. She had been cleaning the upstairs bathroom when Noah walked through a shaft of afternoon sun angled low through the frosted window. The light caught the right side of his face for less than 2 seconds. He stopped, turned his head sharply away, brought one finger to his ear, that exact location, and his right eye tightened with an expression that was, unmistakably, pain. Light did not cause ear pain in children with sensory neural deafness. Light could cause ear pain in a child with something pressing on a nerve. She found Damien in the kitchen and said, "Mr. Caldwell, 5 minutes about Noah." He set his phone down. "Go ahead." A specific pain response in his right ear, always the same location, triggered by sound and by direct light at certain angles. My younger brother had the same pattern. 2 years of misdiagnosis. It turned out to be a foreign body in the canal. Once it was removed, he could hear normally. She kept her voice level. "I'm not saying Noah's situation is identical. I'm asking you to request one more scope, a simple otoscopy, to rule it out. If I'm wrong, nothing is lost." Damien was quiet. "My son has been under specialist care for 3 years, he said. The kitchen door opened. Mrs. Patton. The timing was not accidental. The door opening at exactly the wrong moment. The woman already composed. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, directing herself entirely to him. "I've been watching a pattern. Sophia has positioned herself near Noah repeatedly since her first day. She inserts herself into his care, asks questions beyond her role, and appears to be building a deliberate relationship with him." A pause. "A new hire who consistently redirects attention to the child of a wealthy single father. It raises questions about motivation that you deserve to consider." Sophia watched Damien weigh it, not because he believed Mrs. Patton entirely, but because he was a man who had been managing a vulnerable child for years and had learned that the cost of being wrong was one he could not afford. "I don't need a cleaning person to teach me how to care for my child," he said, flat and final. "You are not authorized to request medical procedures for Noah. That is not your role." He moved toward the door. "Mr. Caldwell." He stopped, did not turn around. "His ear, please, just one more look." A silence. "Leave it," he said. He walked out. In the doorway behind him, Noah stood. He had come downstairs at some point during the conversation. Sophia hadn't heard him. He stood in the hallway with one hand pressed to his right ear, his eyes moving between Sophia and the corridor, where his father had gone, his face carrying the panic of a child watching the one safe thing in the room walk out the door. Mrs. Patton said, "That will be all for today." Sophia walked past her, past Noah, and kept her face composed until she reached the east corridor bathroom. She ran the water. Slow, counted breaths, the kind she had learned in rooms where crying was not an option. Outside, she could still hear it, the soft, rhythmic knock of his head against the wall. Patient, steady, still there. "I'm not done yet," she told herself. Not yet. She found the penlight in the first aid kit beneath the bathroom sink. It was Tuesday, Mrs. Patton's day in the city. A 2-hour window. Dismissed people learned to notice which doors stay open. Noah was running a fever. She had known since morning, the worn-out stillness of a child who has stopped expecting relief. By early afternoon, he had moved to the window seat in his room, one hand over his ear, his face the color of someone losing a private battle for a very long time. She came in quietly and sat beside him. She made the gesture, open palm, head tilt, that had come to mean, "May I?" He looked at her with exhausted eyes. Then, slowly, he moved his hand away from his ear and turned his face toward her. She clicked the penlight on. She knew what clean looked like. She knew what wrong looked like. She had spent 2 years learning the difference in a small Portland apartment with a flashlight app and a frightened child beside her. At first, nothing. Redness along the canal wall, expected from chronic pressure. Then Noah shifted. The angle changed by half a degree, and the light fell differently. There, small, dark, wedged into the posterior upper wall of the canal, barely visible at this angle, with this light, if you were specifically looking here and nowhere else. Dense in a way organic matter was not, a sliver of something rigid, slightly curved, the curve of a fractured medical instrument, small enough to have been there for years. Small enough that every imaging scan performed by physicians looking for neurological abnormalities, structural malformations, the large and expensive explanations, had passed over it as shadow, artifact, or nothing. Sophia held perfectly still. She clicked off the penlight. She looked at Noah and made the gesture. Hand to sternum. "I feel this." Then pointed at him and nodded slowly. "I see it. I see you." He did not smile, but he placed his hand over hers briefly, with the pressure of someone making contact across a long distance. This had been inside him for years. In every image, in every scan, that called it shadow or artifact or clinically insignificant. Someone had broken something during his newborn hearing test. The fragment had stayed. The treatment had continued. The billing had continued. And nobody had looked, because nobody had needed to, as long as the diagnosis held. She sat with her hands in her lap and made herself breathe. Tomorrow, she was going to act. She tried the proper channels first. 4 calls in 40 minutes from the East Corridor bathroom with the water running. The clinic, the nurse line, the general inquiry extension. All 4 arrived at the same wall. She was not a family member, not a legal guardian, not a licensed medical professional. Nobody with standing was calling back. She stood in the corridor with her phone in her hand, Noah's fever climbing, the clock showing 3:15. She thought, if I do nothing and he gets worse, I will have to live with that. She thought, if I do something and it goes wrong, I lose everything. The job, Grandma Ellie's care, everything. She thought, Danny. She went back to Noah's room. She went back with the penlight, clean hands scrubbed to the elbow, and the thin-tipped forceps she had found, sterile, wrapped, untouched in the first aid kit. She examined the fragment twice. It was not near the tympanic membrane. It was not deep enough to require specialist equipment. It had migrated into the posterior wall over years and was now accessible to someone who knew the angle and had steady hands. She looked at Noah. "I'm going to try something," she said, in words and in gesture both. "I need you to keep your eyes on mine. Can you do that?" He looked at her with the old eyes, the eyes that had been managing pain independently for as long as he could remember, and nodded. She talked to him the entire time, with her face, with the steady rhythm of her attention, making sure his eyes stayed on hers. When he flinched, she stopped. When he steadied, she continued. He was braver than she was. He had been braver about this every day for years, without anyone to be brave alongside. The forceps found contact. The fragment shifted. In one clean, steady motion, it came free. She held it to the light. A small, curved sliver of dark material, dense, with the faint residual shine of something once smooth and now fractured. Medical-grade polymer. The kind used in neonatal hearing assessment probes. The kind that, if a device fractured during a newborn test and the fragment was small enough, might be missed on a routine check, might migrate over months and years into the canal wall, might cause progressive hearing loss and chronic nerve compression in a child who would spend 7 years being treated for a condition he never had. Noah blinked. He sat up. His face changed. Bewilderment working from the eyes outward, a complete realignment. He moved his head left, then right, the careful attention of someone calibrating a new instrument. Then he turned toward the hallway, toward footsteps on the marble below. He drew a breath, and in a voice that was thin and unsteady and entirely real, he said, "Dad." He said it like a word he was testing for the first time, in a language he had never spoken. Then again, louder. "Dad." Sophia closed her eyes. She heard the front door. The footsteps stop on the landing. Damien's voice from below, controlled, then not. "Noah." The bedroom door opened. Damien took in the scene sequentially. His son on the floor, his son's face wet-eyed and bewildered and alive in a way Damien had never once seen. And Sophia kneeling beside him, a smear of blood from the canal on her right hand, holding the forceps and the fragment. She watched him look at the blood and the instrument and his son on the floor, and arrive at the only story available to someone who didn't have the prior knowledge she had. It took less than 3 seconds. Security. Quiet. Quiet. Absolutely controlled. "In here, now!" "Mr. Caldwell, please do not speak to him." He stepped between her and Noah with the clean decisiveness of a father interposing his body. "Get her out. Call the police. She will not be paid. She will hear from my attorneys before the week is out." The security team arrived in under a minute. No force, no roughness, but their hands on her arms communicated a finality she had felt before in different rooms. The hallway, the service elevator, the side entrance. The rain had started, the gray, patient March kind that soaked through fabric without drama. She stood on the pavement outside the service entrance, still holding the fragment in her closed fist, and somewhere in the house behind her, she could hear Noah saying his father's name, again and again, in that thin, new, stunned voice. Her phone rang. "Rosewood Senior Care Center. Ms. Bennett, I'm calling regarding your grandmother's placement. We've received a notification from the Caldwell household that your position has been terminated effective immediately. We'll need to discuss transferring your grandmother to an alternative facility within the next..." She stopped hearing the rest. She thought, I've destroyed everything again, just like when I almost lost Danny. Her phone slipped from her fingers and hit the pavement. It lay in a puddle of gray reflected light, still connected to the call, and she stood in the rain over it and looked at the sky and thought of paper birds. The hospital pulled all prior imaging within 2 hours. The fragment, bagged, labeled, on a steel tray in Boston Medical's pediatric ENT department, appeared on 3 separate scans going back to when Noah was 4. In each image, it was noted as calcified matter, imaging artifact, and, most recently, clinically insignificant, not fabrications. The annotations of physicians looking for something large and missing something small. The ordinary, expensive failure of people who had decided early what they were looking for. Sophia sat in a plastic chair outside the examination room. She had been brought here not gently and not with apology, but because Dr. Harlan, chief of pediatric ENT, had looked at the fragment she'd preserved in her closed fist through 40 minutes of rain and said within 60 seconds, "Where did this come from?" Not a rhetorical question. Damien sat across the corridor. He had not spoken to her. He had spoken to the doctors, the nurses, the front desk, handling everything with the compressed efficiency of a man routing every resource toward a single crisis. He had not looked at her directly. She understood. He didn't yet know what she was. She was going to let him decide. A nurse had handed her a cup of coffee, with the specific sympathy reserved for people who have clearly had a very bad hour. She held it without drinking it. The door opened. Dr. Harlan came out with his team. Behind them, Dr. Fenwick, Damien's primary specialist, whose name appeared on all 7 treatment protocols. Fenwick was careful in the manner of someone who had spent years being believed without question, and was only now encountering a room where that no longer worked. The fragment is medical-grade polymer, Dr. Harlan said, consistent with a neonatal hearing assessment probe used in standard newborn testing. The unit appears to have been defective. When the probe fractured, a small portion remained in the canal and was not identified. Over time, it migrated into the posterior wall. A pause. The pain Noah has experienced is consistent with chronic nerve compression. The hearing loss is entirely conductive, entirely attributable to the obstruction. The corridor was quiet. He was never deaf, Damien said. He has never had sensory neural deafness. The hearing degradation was progressive, caused by the obstruction, and entirely reversible with its removal. The fragment was visible in imaging going back 3 years. It was noted in each scan and classified as non-significant. Dr. Harlan did not look at Fenwick. We'll need to discuss how that classification persisted across multiple reviews. Damien looked at Fenwick. Fenwick cleared his throat, sorting through his options with the efficiency of someone who had always had options, arriving too slowly at the only one still available. The imaging interpretation was consistent with standard diagnostic criteria for Fenwick. Damien's voice was very quiet. Fenwick stopped. 3 years, Damien said. 7 specialists, including you. 4 clinics. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. A new member of my household staff identified this in 2 weeks with a penlight. I want to understand how that is possible. A pause, during which something happened in Fenwick's face, the slow collapse of a man who has spent a long time being believed and has just run out of the room in which that worked. The current treatment protocol has generated substantial research funding, Dr. Harlan said. Sourced, in part, from a subsidiary of your company, Mr. Caldwell. We overlooked what was visible because the protocol was profitable. That sentence sat in the corridor and nobody defended it. My son has been in pain for 3 years, Damien said. He couldn't hear his own name because the protocol was profitable. Fenwick said, "We never intended. You're done. Your contract is terminated tonight. My legal team will be in touch in the morning." He turned. He crossed the corridor and sat down in the chair beside Sophia, beside her, not across, and said nothing for a long moment. "My son called my name," he said. "Yes." In 7 years, he had said it twice. The therapists told me he was non-verbal by choice. His jaw moved. By choice. She didn't add to that. There was nothing to add. "I had you removed from my house," he said. "You didn't know. I should have listened 2 weeks ago." She looked at the examination room door. "There's someone in there who needs you more than he needs you out here apologizing to me." He looked at her with the exhaustion of a man who had run out of reasons to maintain distance. Simply looked. Then he stood and went through the door. She heard, through the gap, the audiologist's voice, then Noah's, thin, exploratory, still finding its confidence. Then Damien's voice answering, low and unsteady in a way she had not once heard. And then something she hadn't expected. Damien laughing. A short, involuntary sound, the laugh of someone who had forgotten it was allowed. She held the cold coffee cup and let herself, very quietly, cry. When Damien came back out, his eyes were red at the corners. "I want to introduce you to the staff tomorrow, all of them, formally, as someone with my full trust." A pause. "I should have done it on your first day." "You didn't know me on your first day," she said. "No," he said. "But I know you now." 3 weeks later, the dining room table was set for 3. Nobody had set it in years. Damien ate at his desk, at the kitchen counter. The household had stopped asking. Noah had asked. He had asked in his new way, with his voice still thin, still learning its own confidence, alongside the ears that were learning theirs. He had stood in the kitchen doorway and said to Sophia, "The big room. Can we?" She had said, "Yes." She made pasta, butter and herbs and cream, her grandmother's recipe, which was less a recipe than a habit of comfort, the thing you made when you wanted someone to feel held. Noah ate with the focused pleasure of a child still discovering joy in the act of hearing himself eat. He kept lifting his head when the rain started against the window, going still, tracking the sound as if it might stop if he looked away. Not from pain, from pure, wide-open interest. He was learning, in real time, what rain sounded like. Damien watched him, grief and gratitude coexisting in a face that had been braced against both for years, slowly learning how to stop. She had stayed because Damien had stood before the entire household staff, assembled in the foyer where Sophia had knelt on her first morning, and said, without preamble, "Sophia has my complete trust. Her role in this house is whatever she needs it to be. Anyone who questions that is welcome to resign." Mrs. Patton had submitted her resignation before noon. Sophia had made sure the woman's severance was calculated correctly before the paperwork went through. She had called Rosewood Senior Care Center and arranged for her grandmother's placement to continue, in a room with better light and a window that faced the garden. "Sophie," Noah said. She looked up. He held a forkful of pasta toward her. An offering, a question, or both. "Good?" she asked. He ate it with ceremony and considered gravely, then gave one slow, deliberate nod. Damien smiled. The unguarded kind, the one that arrived because he had stopped defending against it. After dinner, Noah settled at the table with his book, finger moving along the words, head tilted slightly toward the rain. He said something quietly to himself, the way children talk when processing something too large to keep inside. Then he looked up and found Sophia's eyes across the table. He held out his arms. She went to him. He wrapped both arms around her, pressed his face against her shoulder, and in a voice that was muffled and certain and entirely serious, said, "Mummy Sophie." She went very still. She held him and looked at the wall above his head and blinked. And blinked again, and did not trust herself to speak. After a long moment, she pressed her hand to the back of his head and said, very quietly, "I've got you." He tightened his arms once, then let go and went back to his book. Damien stood at the window with a glass of water, looking out at the garden under the rain. His shoulders had the set of a man trying to be composed about something that would not allow it. When she came to stand beside him, she could see in the glass the slow track of something moving down his face. He didn't raise his hand to it. She reached into the pocket of her sweater. The paper crane had been with her since the first morning. She had straightened the broken wing over many evenings, not made it new, but made it whole enough to hold. Still lopsided, still built from a grocery bag by small hands. She set it on the window ledge beside his hand. He looked at it, then picked it up, two careful fingers holding a broken thing he was not sure he had the right to touch. He closed his hand around it. "He made about 40 of them," he said, quietly uneven. "After his mother died, when he was 4. I didn't know what they were for." Sophia looked at the rain on the glass. "I think he was practicing," she said, "for when he found someone to give one to." A silence, not avoidance. The settled silence of two people who have said the right amount and know it. Damien looked at the crane in his palm. Then he looked at her and whispered, low enough that it was for the room alone, "Thank you for helping it fly." At the table, Noah turned a page. He tilted his head toward the sound of the rain, tracking it with the pure, unhurried attention of a child who has just discovered that the world is full of things worth listening to. Outside, the rain continued its patient work. The dining room table was set for 3. The paper crane sat on the window ledge where both of them could see it, and in the quiet between the rain and the rustle of a turning page, the house that had held so much silence for so long began, at last, to sound like somewhere a family lived. If you have ever been the person in the room whose voice didn't count, too low, too new, too ordinary to matter, this story was for you. Sometimes the one who sees the truth is the one nobody thought to ask. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded tonight that kindness is never wasted, and that the quiet ones are often the ones who save everything. Leave a comment below. Have you ever had someone truly see you?